Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to feel, and grace my fears relieved. That grace appeared the hour I first believed. Through many dangerous toils and snares, I that say, yes, that say, no wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Was blind, oh, but now I see.
Hey everybody, welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. It is Wednesday, August 12th, around 6 o'clock, a little after now. And for those of you who have been joining me every Wednesday for our Bible studies, you probably noticed that this looks a bit different. And we're trying a little experiment over these next few weeks. One of the things that we're talking about when we finally get back into the building together sometime in 2024, that we're going to shift our worship a bit and do two parts when we get together. The first part will be worship, kind of like what we're doing online now for about 30 minutes. And then for the second 30 minutes, we're thinking we'll dismiss the kids to go off to a Sunday school experience. And then the big people will stay and we'll do a little bit more music like we just did with my friend B.J. Thomas. And then we'll dig deeper into the sermon. So we're calling it 30-30 worship. So grace worship, the first half hour, and grace forward Bible study, the second half hour. And, based on our worship weekend last weekend, probably be more like 50-10 because the service went a little longer, but we had a lot of good stuff. So that's sort of the dream. So rather than doing that all on a Sunday, we're splitting it up. Worship on the weekend, and the second part will be Wednesday nights until we get together. And so we thought what we'd do now is shift it a little bit. Wednesday night, add a song in, do it from the church, see how it feels, just to practice a little bit. And so we're glad you're joining us. And you can still put your comments in. You can still say hi to your friends. You can still ask questions if you have them, and we'll be following up as we go along. So what we're doing in these Bible studies is we are basically going through the Gospel of Mark, which is what we're preaching on, but it gives us a chance to go a bit deeper into the topic. So last weekend, Pastor Warren Stewart and I had a chance to look at Jesus at Matthew's party, or Levi's party as he's called in Mark. And so I'm going to dig a bit deeper into that, give some insights that we didn't have time to talk about during the sermon time. So as we get ready to look at this great story of Jesus going to Matthew's party, I want to give a little bit of review, a couple different things for us as we think about this story. So the first way I want to review is this. The first point is this. Mark is about Jesus proclaiming that God is up to something new, that God is writing this new storyline, that God is, through Jesus, bringing the kingdom of God into the present. The future hope of the kingdom of God is coming into the present through Jesus. And so the whole gospel is about Jesus demonstrating that. Every time that Jesus speaks word of grace or hope or life or forgiveness, he is bringing the future of God's kingdom into the present. Every time that Jesus heals somebody or casts out demons or feeds people, Jesus is bringing the kingdom of God, the future kingdom of God, into the present. And so every time Jesus fights for justice, every time Jesus stands against boundaries that keep people away from God, he is bringing the future of God's kingdom into the present. And ultimately, we will see that in all of its full force when Jesus hangs on the cross. The last place that you'd expect to see the kingdom of God is on a cross, but that's where it's most visible. So Mark is about Jesus proclaiming this good news that the future has come into the present. And even though it hasn't come fully yet, it's now at work. And then the second point of review has to do with when Jesus was baptized. And you remember we talked about this a week or two ago in our Bible study, that when Jesus was baptized, it says the Spirit of God descended on Jesus in a dove, and the heavens opened up, or the heavens were split apart or torn apart. And that same phrase is used at the end when Jesus dies and the temple curtain is torn apart, that the barrier between God and humanity was torn apart. And so when Jesus brings the kingdom of God into the present, he is tearing apart all the boundaries that keep people from God. And that's what these stories are about. And that's what this story is about now in Mark chapter 2. Jesus bringing the future into the present by breaking down barriers. So here we go. Mark chapter 2. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. We're talking here about the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. And as he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Now, why was he sitting at the tax collector's booth? Because Levi, or Matthew, was a tax collector. So we talked about this before, the stigma of being a tax collector back in Jesus' day. And the reason why it was a stigma was because these tax collectors, were Jewish men collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman enemy. And so these Jewish men, so to speak, sold their souls to the Roman government. They joined with the oppressor. And they were now oppressing their fellow Jews. Oftentimes, not just charging taxes, but overtaxing their fellow Jews and pocketing the difference. So these men were traitors. Now, it could very well be that Levi was not working directly for the Roman government, but he could be that he was working for King Herod, the Jewish king. But when King Herod was collecting taxes, it was to collect taxes for Rome. So it was the same thing. Matthew was a traitor, and the Jews wanted nothing to do with him. He was an outsider. He was going to hell. And yet, Jesus says to this hated, despised traitor to the Jews, "Follow me." So Jesus does something really radical here. He is breaking religious barriers. All right, remember how when Jesus was baptized, the heavens were torn apart. The barrier between God and us was removed. Jesus in this story is showing that the barriers have indeed broken, that God has come for outcasts, for traitors, for all the wrong kinds of people. Now, most religions, I would say all religions, have these real clear barriers between who's in and who's out. And even though Christianity is meant to be an inclusive faith experience, and Jesus talks about that, as we'll see, Paul talks about that, the Christian church, all too often, has erected barriers to keep the wrong kinds of people out, depending on who we think the wrong kinds of people are. And so a lot of churches, probably most churches, have these subtle and not so subtle rules that keep people away. And we may not even be aware of them. For example, we may think that our church is really friendly, and yet newcomers may come to the church, and not one person will say hi to them. We think we're friendly, but we're friendly to each other. We're not friendly to newcomers. And what that subtly says to newcomers is, I'm not welcome here. It could be that the way that we do ministry says to certain ethnic groups, you're not welcome here. And we may not even know it. And of course, there are those things that we as Christians do that let people know you're not welcome here. If you're a Republican, you're not welcome here. If you're a Democrat, you're not welcome here. If you're a prostitute, a sinner, if you're gay, if you're lesbian, you're not welcome here. And so we have all of these rules set in place to keep people out. And so what happens in too many of our churches is we create these barriers between people and God. And when we have people coming to our churches hungering for God and God's grace, we scandalize them by saying they're not welcome here. And it happens in a lot of churches. Jesus, on the other hand, doesn't scandalize the outsiders. He scandalizes the insiders. And he said, look at who I think ought to be joining you for worship this weekend. As far as I'm concerned, this person is welcome. And so Jesus is saying, this is what the future looks like. This is what the kingdom of God looks like. Every tribe, every ethnicity, every person, every sinner is welcome into the kingdom of God. And this is a grace that reaches everyone. This is a grace for everyone. And that can be scandalous to those of us who are in the inside. So we as Christians tend to scandalize outsiders by saying they can't come. Jesus scandalizes insiders by saying outsiders are welcome. But then the story continues. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. Now, in Jesus' culture, when you shared a meal, it wasn't just sharing a meal. Something cultural was happening there. You were saying, by having a meal with someone, you are my equal and you are my friend. I accept you into my circle of friends. And so the very fact that Jesus is eating with sinners and tax collectors, this is something really radical about the kingdom of God. So when the Bible uses the word sinners, we have this certain idea that it means all of us have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It does mean that. But in Jesus' context in particular, a sinner was anyone who didn't believe in God or practice religion the way that the religious elite did. So the religious elite had all these rules. This is what it looks like to be on the inside. You don't follow them well enough, so you're a sinner. You're an outsider. And Jesus said, I don't think so. I think they're in. And you insiders might want to look again because you might just be out. So Jesus is doing something radical here by eating with these non-religious people or these not overly religious people. And these are the people who are attracted to Jesus, and it was the insiders who were repulsed by Jesus. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw Jesus eating with sinners and tax collectors, they asked Jesus' disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but sinners." So, here's some take-home for us as Christian people. Far too often, throughout Christian history, we as Christians have scandalized outsiders by saying they're not welcome. Because we're scandalized by their behavior. We're scandalized by the way they live their lives. We're scandalized by their politics. We're scandalized by their ideologies. We're scandalized by their lifestyles. We are scandalized by them, and therefore we turn around and we scandalize them by saying you're not welcome. But Jesus, again, scandalizes those on the outside by hanging out with and accepting those that we would never accept. And so Jesus is showing us this is what the future looks like, where everyone's welcome. This is a radically different kind of religion that shook the world to its core. A religion that said everybody's created in the image of God, everyone is a recipient of God's grace. So for Jesus, this is the future. It's a future where people are invited to come, no matter who they are, and worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. The question is going to be, what kind of church do we want to be? And I think we want to be the kind of church that says anyone and everyone is welcome here. We don't want to be scandalized by outsiders. We want to shock them by letting them know that they're welcome to join us as well. So that's what Jesus is getting at in this story. He is saying that the kingdom of God, the future, where all the tribes and nations gather together to worship God, the future is breaking into human history in the person of Jesus. And no matter who we are, no matter what our skin color, no matter what our politics, no matter what our lifestyle, the one thing that holds us together is our common need for God's grace. Because in the end, like the prodigal son, we were dead, but Jesus makes us alive again. We were lost, but Jesus finds us. That's what holds us together, and that's what the church of Jesus looks like. Messy people hanging out because we've been forgiven. Appreciate you listening. I appreciate you being that kind of church. And a couple things I want you to know about. Tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, Lisa and Tony are going to be leading a little bit of worship. I think I'm going to be there, and we'll do a request night. And all your favorite songs, and it'll be live, 6 o'clock on Facebook. Friday night, Pastor Kathleen will be leading prayer time. And then Saturday, we get back to worship. And we have another message from Mark's Gospel coming up on the weekend. So thanks for being with us. God's best to you. Have a good week. Make sure you wear that mask.